Welcome back to the First Gnostic Church of Christ. We are on video number 3, the read and commentary, Exegesis on the Soul. Now this is going to be a very difficult video for some to hear. What we're going to go over in today's video will challenge you to open your mind about concepts and ideas that perhaps some of you formerly have considered to be taboo and off limits. We're going to start first talking about the tarot, in particular what's called the major arcana cards. There are a total of 22 major arcana cards, and we're going to hone in specifically on card number 15, which is the devil. Let's take a look at this image. We're going to point out roughly 4 themes coming from this card. The first is very obvious. In the backdrop, you see a picture of what one may assume is a drawing of the devil. Mystics understand, or those that study tarot understand, this is actually the image of the horn god, sometimes known as Pan, other times known as the goat, other times Saturnus, sometimes also known as Baphomet. The second is above Baphomet's head, you see a pentagram that is, in this case, reversed. The pentagram itself, with the star pointing down. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is right below the image of Baphomet is the male and the female. And both the male and the female have horns on their heads. And then finally, between the male and the female, you have a chain that binds them together. A couple other things we want to mention that are minor details but also important is that you'll see that the male is pointing his right hand toward the female, very obviously. And then the female also is gently pointing her hands toward the male. You see grapes. Well, this would be, of course, from your vantage point on the left side. And on the male, you'll see that he has his hand, in this case would be his left hand, against his waist or his hip. And then also you'll see that Baphomet has in his left hand a torch. You'll see also that the male figure has a tail of a fire. And then finally, you'll see that in this entire picture, you have Baphomet's hands pointing upward, the right hand pointing upward, and then the down hand or arm pointing downward. Of course, the symbolage here within mysticism is as above, so below. The as above is on the right side, signifying the female. The below, or the left-hand side of Baphomet, meaning the right side of this image, from your vantage point on the screen, would be pointing on the male side. But in order for us to appreciate this image of the tarot card number 15, the devil card, we must understand some terms and some mythology. So first, let's understand this word punish or punishment. So this comes from the word punir, or meaning to punish. Ultimately, correct is what this means, or to inflict penalty, causing pain or some offense, to inflict damage or loss. This word actually is deriving from a similar root from which we get the word pun, pun. Now this is a noun word ultimately meaning to point. Now in modern colloquial language, we understand pun means a type of double entendre. In other words, a word that can humorously be thought of or imply another word or another condition or state. For example, to make a pun would be usually a humorous use of a word in such a way as to suggest 2 or more of its meanings or the meaning of another similar in sound. So why am I pointing out this word pun in order for us to understand punishment or the word punish? Recall that we understood punishment or punish to ultimately mean to correct or to provide a heavy loss or damage to something in order that a lesson be learned. This is one way in which we can arrive at coming to our true selves, finding our way to our truth. It is a way that humiliates us to be punished. This is where we get the word humorous from the word humility. They come from the same word. Human also comes from the word humorous. Humility, human, hummus, humorous. All of those stem from a similar word. These all stem from the same word. Ultimately meaning that thing that is brought down in order that it may experience humility or humbleness. It sees that life itself must be approached with a grain of salt, if you will. The salt of the earth. Humans are also considered to be the salt of the earth. We must approach life as though it were a pun, In other words, it were a joke. And one way in which we can understand this is what appears to be a painful experience as we're going through a type of punishment or heavy blow of a pathway we've taken because of misinstruction is ultimately leading us down a different meaning. So on the surface, it appears to be saying everything is dark and foreboding and wrong. But ultimately, the humor in all of this is when everything's said and done, it is all in vain, and it becomes as though it were not, and we all pass away through death. And then ultimately, we hopefully ascend or transcend. We gain knowledge or gnosis from this experience. So the pun is, or the joke is, what is actually happening to you is a result of some blind road that you've been taken down, a misunderstanding of the original message or meaning of a particular word, in this case, word made flesh, Christ. Let's go further down the rabbit hole. The devil card is trying to say to you what is being said in the book Exegesis on the Soul. So the next obvious thing for us to understand is who is Baphomet. So this is a deity was falsely accused of being worshipped by the Knights Templar. But this name appears in history in many different places, but its original derivative is not clearly understood. But what's more important is what is the symbology of Baphomet. And what we can come to understand, it is the sum total of the universe. The male, the female, the good, evil, on and off, is the equilibrium of opposites. So you can see the goat itself is both male, female. This is the intertwining of the two serpents around the caduceus. And the star, sometimes pointing upward, sometimes pointing downward, is the third eye. And the eyes below are the male and the female, right and left. But the third eye is the amalgamation of the male and the female that is able to see the inner self. You see, the third eye is on the inside, and it was never meant to be on the outside. So this is a misunderstanding by those that stretch to understand mysticism. They think that at some point the pineal gland will reveal a physical third eye. This is not the case. The third eye is on the inside. The pineal gland has not gone asleep unless you have decided to bring it to sleep through what's called Samael, which is the blind god, following after the things of this world, the demiurge. Misunderstanding the original message or meaning of these mystic truths. And when you misunderstand these meanings, it leads to suffering or heavy blow, loss or damage, which is punishment. And a misunderstanding of one word to mean something else is a pun. So this is how we must understand the word punishment when it's being talked about in the Bible and in the Gnostic text. When we understand Baphomet, we understand it also is an amalgamation of two words. The first actually being B-A and the last being M-E-T. B-A coming from the similar word we get paw, ba and paw, which is the masculine part. And then the P-H-O is the physics that brings these two together. M-A, the feminine part, which is the mother, the mirage, the ma, the me, and Baphomet. When you bring these two together, the P-H-O, which we also get philosophy, which is the love of, and knowledge, and also physics itself comes from that word, and physical reality comes from that word. So bringing the male and the female together is the Baphomet, and it is the Sabbatic goat, which is realism, which is understanding this planet Saturn, which we get the word Sabbath, and the astrological sign Capricorn. Total is the goat. So you can see how all these come together. So the original goat pentagram first appeared in the book La Clef de la Magie Noire by French occultist Stanislas de Guiata. And excuse my butchering of French, because I'm not French. This symbol would later become synonymous with Baphomet, and is commonly referred to as the Sabbatic goat. And remember I had told you that in previous videos, the original understanding of the word Sabbath means to return, or to go back, or to be taken back. Meaning, in other words, you were once somewhere, you went somewhere, and now you're returning. That's the original understanding, the higher understanding of the word Sabbath. And this is also what Saturn means, and why we talk in astrology about a Saturn return, 28-year cycle, which also corresponds to the 28-day cycle of the moon, and the menstrual cycle, which is named after the moon, and the month itself is named after the moon. Really, we are supposed to have 13 months, because there are 13 cycles, because, again, the word month comes from the word moon. This is the natural state of man is to vibrate 13 cycles of 28 days, which comes out to 364 days. And the 365 day was supposed to be the day of resurrection, which is the last day of the year. So that was to be its own one day in a year. And this is a day that would stand alone, which is the last day, which is the day of December the 22nd, to the beginning of Capricorn. So you see how all of these begin to tie together. Samael is a figure, Tamatic lure, and Lilith is a female demon in Jewish mythology. You can see here in this image, it has Samael on the top and Lilith on the bottom, written around the goat. The Hebrew letters at the 5 points of the pentagrams spell out Leviathan. And remember, I also told you in previous video, Levitical law comes from a similar word, a root that we get Leviathan, Levitical, Leviticus, Levitical law, Levi, leavened bread. They all stem from the same word, a mythical creature in Jewish lore. This symbol was later adapted by the Church of Satan in 1969 and officially named the Sigil of Baphomet. I want to clarify a little more clearly this understanding in more modern times, Baphomet, and we can read from Aleister Crowley. The Baphomet of Levi was to become an important figure within the cosmology of the Lema, the mystical system established by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century. The Baphomet features in the creed of the Gnostic Catholic Church, recited by the congregation, the Gnostic Mass. In the sentence, and I believe in the serpent and the lion. Now who's the serpent and the lion? Remember, the serpent and the lion is the demiurge, Yaldabaoth. Mystery of mysteries, and his name, Baphomet. He is the gatekeeper. You have to go through him. In fact, you have to go past him. You have to return back to the pleroma. But in order for you to return back to the pleroma, you must ascend above him. You must go through him. You must experience an amalgamation of the male and the female, the Baphomet, the Pa fusing with the Ma. Pa fuse me, Baphomet. Baphomet. In Magic, Book 4, Crowley asserted that Baphomet was a divine androgyny and the hieroglyph of arcane perfection. Seen as that which reflects what occurs above, so reflects below, or as above, so below. He is the divine androgyny because he is at the highest position one can reach in physical reality. But he is not the true God, but he is the highest representation in the physical realm, called the Kanoma. When you have reached that state of Baphomet, you have reached the state by which you can go no higher in the Kanoma. But in order for you to reach that state, you must meditate on the third eye, which is how to bring the male and the female together. The devil does not exist. It is a false name. This is according to Aleister Crowley's entry into his Book 4. It is a false name invented by the Black Brothers to imply a unity in their ignorant muddle of dispersions. A devil who had unity would be a god. The devil is, historically, the god of any people that one personally dislikes. So the devil can be made into anything. Anyone that's standing in the way of some passion or attachment that we have, we consider that to be the devil or the enemy. That's basically what Crowley is saying here. Someone you dislike. This serpent, Satan, is not the enemy of man, but he who made gods of our race. Knowing good and evil, he bade, know thyself, and taught initiation. Satan, ultimately through punishment and bondage. Now remember, the male and the female were chained together in the tarot card. This is not the amalgamation. It's only a physical representation of how man subjugates the female and thereby binds them both to the physical realm, and how the woman submits to that truth. We're going to understand this a little further here in a moment when we talk about Samael and Lilith, or Lilith. He is the devil of the Book of Thoth, and his emblem is Baphomet, the androgyny, who is the hieroglyph of arcane perfection. He is therefore life and love. But moreover, letter is Ayin, the eye, so that he is light. In a zodiacal image is Capricornus, the leaping goat, whose attribute is liberty. Why is it the leaping goat? Because the goat, think about the goat, is the animal that is persistently climbing up the mountainside. And it has unimaginable feats. And when you think about when Christ says, if you believe, you'll say to that mountain, cast yourself into the sea, and it will. This is what Christ's talking about. He's not literally saying point your finger in a mountain and say cast yourself in the sea and it'll cast itself in the sea. But he's saying to you an image of the goat climbing the mountain, overcoming that mountain as though it never existed. So this is why the goat represents liberty, because it's able to transcend above physical reality. And this is why also Saturn is known as the planet confinement and limitations and reality. or rather the sign, and Saturn is known as that planet, and where we get the word Sabbath. Satan, Saturday, is the Sabbath, Saturn's day. This represents the obstacle before we get to Sunday. Sunday being named after the sun, which is the light. Before we get to the light, we must go through Saturday. Before we return to the light, we must go through Saturday. But in order to get to Saturday, we must go through Friday first, which is Venus, which is named after Frida, by the way, which is also named after Estar, which is also named after Venus. So we go through Venus, which is Lucifer, to get to Baphomet, which is Saturday, which is the Sabbath, in order to get to Sunday, which is the light. It all begins with Sunday, but it also ends with Sunday. And we begin to reflect again on Monday, which is Moon Day, so forth and so on. And we go through each one of the planets of the zodiac, and we go through these cycles. And ever going through these cycles, we spiral higher and higher and higher until eventually we reach the devil himself, or Baphomet, who's the gatekeeper. And then if we're able to get through Baphomet, we get through a lesson. But we can go through Baphomet either through beauty or suffering. And when we go through suffering, it's because of bondage to something. But when we go through it through beauty, it's when we recognize the equity of all things, the face of God in all things, that everything is beautiful as it is, just as it is. And we are no longer bound to insecurity or lack of faith, that everything will unfold exactly the way God intended. This is what it means to believe in the Christ and to have faith in God, is to not get attached to outcomes. When we get attached to outcomes, that's when we begin to become in bondage to Baphomet and chained to the male and female being chained to one another on the outward, not going within to reflect on the third eye, one's true self, understanding the soul, as we talked about in previous videos, the cup. Now we understand the baptism, named after Baphomet, baptism, Baphometism, to administer the rite of baptism, immerse, dip in water, be over one's head. What's over one's head? Well, Baphomet and the third eye, the crown chakra. To be soaked in wine, when Christ talks about the wine, drinking of the wine, the cup being dipped into the waters. The immersion, we're being immersed or dunked into this realm, the murky waters. Where are we being dunked from? We're being dunked from the pleroma, the fullness, our original state, which was perfection. And we were dunked into this realm, and Christ came to bring us back to the pleroma, meaning assisting us to ascend above the murky realms, this realm, the Kanoma. And so when we're doing a physical baptism, we're ritualizing symbolically the correspondence of the higher meaning of returning to, or the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, to the pleroma, going through Saturday, going through Saturn, going through the limitations, transcending the limitations, being as the mountain goat that transcends the mountain, or cast yourself into the sea, and so it shall be cast into the sea, as Christ says. Believe, right? Faith in the Father, Mother, monad, that it already has placed within you a seed that it has intended from the beginning, and that you always were meant to be married to the Father, and you are the feminine soul that is the receptacle. But you must understand that soul and become as that cup, so that as the womb, it can take in the Father, and then you can birth your true self, which is to be born again as a child. A couple other mythologies we want to understand before we continue our read and commentary. Exegesis on the soul. We talked about Lilith. She is a figure in Jewish mythology developed earliest in the Babylonian Talmud. Lilith, or Lilith, is often envisioned as a dangerous demon of the night who is sexually wanton and who steals babies in the darkness. Now, this is mentioned because this talks about luster. It also talks about abortion, as well as infertility and barrenness. The female that cannot have a baby, nor the male that can have semen. But it's done through sexual wantonness, meaning, in other words, being led astray by the things of this world, the luster of this world, the mirage. But it also says here that that is one side of Lilith, that is the side of bondage, the female image that is in bondage to the male representing the will to go out and get it because of the luster. I want this. And it mistakes its true purpose for things that are distracting it on the outside. And it's not meditating on the third eye and living its life mindfully on the inside. It's ignoring, not putting equal to the physical reality or the male aspect, the outer, external, equal to the internal self. And so it goes out of control. And it thinks that everything on the outside is the message, when actually it's just a messenger that's misleading it. And so it goes on a campaign, trying to figure out what it wants and fulfill its lust, not paying attention and quieting down and tuning in to the inner self, the feminine, in order to understand that all the answers that it ever wanted is already within itself, Christ within, the hope of glory. The negative aspect of the mythology of Lilith is that being. In the male form, it comes through as promiscuity, infidelity, going after riches and fame and fortune and reputation, dominion, authority, war, tyranny, destitute, control, objectivity, lust. In the female, it comes out as insecurity, impatience, weakness, codependency, vapidness, emptiness, not silence, but emptiness, as a vacuum, a parasite, a succubus, one that is like a vampire, that drains life from others as a parasite, so that it is as a host and it is a parasite. That's the feminine expression of the negative aspect of Lilith, and thereby it leads to the host being drained of its life force, and thereby that host is barren, infertile, impotent. So when you're bound to that understanding and you're only living according to the inner world, the feminine, you become as a vacuum. And when you only live the outer world, you become as a sword, plunging its murderous intention into the world. And so our understanding of the lower part of Baphomet, or the baptism, is to be attached to this world, not realizing your true origin and where you truly belong. You truly belong in a higher realm, and that's where you must put your attention. And those answers lie within. The outer self, the male, is important as well. It's where the actual physical thing happens. It's the will of the Father. Without the shaping of the mother, the love of the mother, there would be no formation, and the will of the Father would be hapless and would go about not creating life, bringing forth destruction and death. And this is the thing we want to understand. We're going to talk about Samael here in a moment, but he's the angel of death. But he's also the opposite of that. And so this is, first, what we understand is the negative part of Lilith. Now, what is the positive aspect of Lilith? This is coming from the 8th and 10th century alphabet of Ben Siyar, is considered to be the oldest form of the story of Lilith, Adam's first wife. In the text, an amulet is inscribed with the name of 3 angels, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Samangiloth, and is placed around the neck of newborn boys in order to protect them from Leline until their circumcision. Now, this basically means nocturnal emissions. This is really what it is, the demon of nocturnal emissions, Lilin, which is obviously coming from a similar word that we get, Lilith. And so this amulet was actually an amulet given to the young boys so they don't have nocturnal emissions and be led astray by the things of this world, the lust of this world. The amulet used against Lilith that were thought to derive from this tradition are in fact dated as being much older. So Lilith actually was protecting the boys from the higher part of Lilith here, being described as someone who's protecting the boys from having these nocturnal emissions. The idea in the text that Adam had a wife prior to Eve may have developed from an interpretation of the book of Genesis and its dual creation accounts, while Genesis 2:22 describes God's creation of Eve from Adam's ribs. An earlier passage, 1:27, already indicates that a woman had been made. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Lilith, in the higher form, is the soul, part of the man, the will of God. We were all created as a him in the beginning. And when we had an equal understanding of the equality of the male and the female, created as equal, the outer world being just as important as the inner world, and that we not just live our lives blindly. And so the male and the female was created together to be equal. This is what the higher understanding of Lilith is, which is the inner light, by the way. The word Lilith also comes from a similar word where we get the word light. The alphabet text places Lilith's creation after God's words in Genesis 2:18, that it is not good for man to be alone. In other words, not good for man not to have a third eye, not to see their inner selves, to reflect on, just as the moon, the mind, reflects the light of the sun. In this text, God forms Lilith out of the clay from which he made Adam, but she and Adam bicker. Lilith claims that since she and Adam were created in the same way, they were equal, and she refuses to submit to him. So Lilith basically is your inner self telling you, don't go there, but you don't listen to it because you're so enamored by the thing on the outside, whatever it is, reputation, lust of the flesh, the easy way out, the short pathway rather than the road less traveled, listening to everybody else that tells you what you should or shouldn't be, rather than listening to the feminine part of yourself, the third eye, that looks within, that does not submit and give way to the unbridled will on the outside. but understands that it is just as important as the outside world. You see, today we live in a world where everything is all about instant gratification and sense orientation, which is the opposite of the mind, which is the masculine, not the feminine. And that's what it means when it talks about it's not good for man to be alone. Now we're beginning to see how this comes together, right? The last thing we need to cover, the understanding of Samael, which is the masculine part of Baphomet. So Samael, in its negative aspect, of course, is Yod-Baoth, the blind god. It's one of his names. But he's also an archangel. But in his negative aspect, he is the angel of death. Who was the author of death? Well, Christ says it was Satan. Who is Samael? Who is Yod-Baoth? Who is Saturn? Who is the Saturday? The limitations. And so what are we all ultimately trying to do? We're all trying to find the elixir, the philosopher's stone. We're all trying to find eternal life, to go beyond limitations. But we must return back to that state that we were previously. But in order for us to do that, we must go through death. We must go through Samael. We must go through Baphomet. We must go past our limitations. So he's the accuser. What is he accusing you of? You're not worthy to pass. You see, in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf says to Balrog, you shall not pass. And he puts his staff down. But in this instance, you are not Gandalf. You're Balrog. And you're saying to yourself, who is Gandalf, you shall not pass. When you reach a state, you realize your worthiness to receive the good news, that God loves you just the way you are, and that you are worthy, and you are perfect as intended from the beginning. This is the beginning of understanding of how to take that staff back from Balrog and demand he not pass. The assemblage of saying you shall not pass is not allowing Lilith to overtake you and make you barren. In other words, not allowing your will to go out of control with no feminine positive expression of allowing the feminine within to be of import. So you must take the staff back. This is the caduceus, the entanglement of the two serpents around the staff, the male and the female. And when you've done that, and you've taken your staff back, which rightfully belongs to you, then you can demand that no sin, no attachment, no need for reputation, promiscuity, so forth and so on, shall pass you. Because you are the wizard, you are the wise, you are the Sophia, you are the embodiment of the Christ. And you are transcending. This is what it means when it talks about God wrestling with Jacob. He's going up 33 steps of the ladder beyond into the seventh heaven. He wrestles with the angel, Samael, who is the face of God, who is Sabaoth, Saturday. And so the negative aspect of Samael is to accuse you. You're not worthy. And to point out all your sins and your failings. And you're no good. You're unworthy. You're not equal to me. You're feminine. I subdue you. I overcome you. I rape you. Because I am your superior. I am the higher sex. I'm male. You are female. And so he doesn't listen to the inner self. So he walks around blindly, therefore the blind God. And that way of living leads to death and a misunderstanding of what God intended you to be from the beginning. Understanding the original meaning or message to be something else, or a pun. Not understanding the joke that's been at your expense. And thereby you must go through punishment. Not because God is punishing you, but because you are allowing yourself to be punished. You are allowing this suffering to be placed on you because you're going down a pathway that reaps these outcomes. Misunderstanding sin, which is missing the mark of understanding of your true nature. You're not a lowly beast, you're not wretched. And when you think in those terms, then it results in bad seed. Because you are only what you really believe you are. If you believe you're bad and evil, then you'll do bad and evil things, which is divisive things, and things that are destructive and painful that lead to death and suffering. Now that's the lower part of Samael, who lives life out blindly. So what is the higher part of Samael? The anthroposophist, Samael is known as one of the seven archangels. Saint Gregory gives the seven archangels as Anael, Gabriel, Michael, Oriphel, Raphael, Samael, and Zerachiel. They are all imagined to have a special assignment to act as global zygists, time spirits. When you come to realize that you are son and daughter of God, God loves you just the way you are, you're perfect, and you're worthy to receive the good news that Christ brought us, and you have faith in that, and you open up as a receptacle, and you appreciate the feminine, you come to know the feminine, and you focus on the third eye, then you regain the staff. And Samael then allows you to pass. He will become your guardian angel. He will turn from your accuser and then have come to see that you are worthy, and then will become your guardian. Not because you were never worthy, but because you didn't realize you were worthy. So he stood in your way as a symbol of how you saw yourself on the inside. And when you finally realize that all Samael is a blank canvas for you to paint your own images onto, that is when Samael will then hand over your staff and will allow you to pass, and will actually become as your guardian angel and continually guide you. Now, that's the way it works, according to all these correspondences on our spiritual understanding of what's being said. Now, I'm bringing forth this very complicated backdrop so you can understand this tarot card, the devil card, and the major arcana of the tarot deck. And you begin to understand all of these mystical secrets that are shared throughout all cultures, whether it be Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, so forth and so on. Now that we have that understanding, we can pick up from when we talked about in our last video how we misinterpret what's being talked about in the Bible and Gnostic texts and all quote-unquote religious texts or mystical texts from the past. How it's misunderstood. The original meaning, the pun, which leads to punishment, of these texts was to be understood through a spiritual lens, not a physical lens. It was never meant for women to wear cloth over their face and cover their face. It was never meant for women to remain virgins before marriage while the husband goes out and sleeps everywhere, or be submitted to the husband, or not to speak out in church. Those things have been brought about at the expense of the woman, the female sex in this world, because the Bible and the sacred texts were taken literally. Paul himself said not to take the text literally. As he said, as I was reading in the last video, I wrote in my letter, do not associate with whores, meaning not the whores of the world, or the greedy or thieves or idols worshippers, since you would have to leave the world. So he's not talking about literally. This is so key, and why Christ talks about don't become enamored with the messenger. Don't become enamored of the things of this world, the lust of this world, and everything on the outside, the literal, the physical. Taking it literally, everything around you. Everything that's happening around you are symbols. They're merely just there as signs and symbols, helping you understand where your path is. When you see an obstacle, it's telling you to go a different way. When a door opens, it's telling you to go that way. So don't take it literally. These are spiritual truths, and they must be understood on a spiritual level. So that's where we left off in our last video. Now we understand this word, Baphomet, and baptism. We may more clearly understand what's being said now in the Exegesis of the Soul under this section called Baptism of the Soul. It's written here, as long as the soul goes on running around everywhere, sleeping with whomever she meets, and defiling herself, she will suffer her deserved punishment. In other words, she will experience a false reality, a false understanding, the original intention of what was spoken, the word from the beginning. The true meaning of that word will be made into a joke, a pun, and thereby one will experience suffering and death, disease and defilement. This is the way it's set up. There's a negative and positive, you see. But when she perceives the trouble she's in, weeps before the Father and repents, see, reconsider, rethink. You know, when we are going through punishment, do we not weep? When we're going through hard times, do we not cry? When we are going through difficulty, do we not cry? We are crying because tears represents releasing of emotions. It's cathartic. It is symbolically saying to you, release these unclean understandings of your path from your inner being, inner self, the feminine, misunderstanding of who you really are. And so that's when you begin to come to the Father, because then you begin to say, I don't get it. I need to meditate. I need to reconsider. I need to rethink the path I've been taking. Why is it led down to all of this loss, suffering, and death? Why do people leave me? Why do I leave things in trouble, and myself in trouble? So then you begin to reconsider, rethink, repent, repensare, to think. But when she perceives the troubles she's in, weeps before the Father is her true will that wants to be seated in the womb, if she but listens to and allows as a receptacle the cup of Christ to trust the Father, that it is already seated within her exactly what she was intended to be from the beginning, which is to marry the Father, which is her true will. Then the Father will pity her and make her womb turn from external and turn inward again. See, now her attention goes from all the answers are on the outside to now she's paying attention intuitively, instinctively, from the inside. It's not that she ignores the outside, that must be balanced, but rather everything being just turned external and male is superior, now she knows how to harmonize them and project her inner understanding from what she's perceiving from her senses on the outside as signs and symbols that is guiding her wisdom. And the womb turn from external and turn inward again, and she will recover her proper character. Now she begins to use the third eye to really think about clearing away the noise on the outside, so she can listen to the inner voice. It is not like this for a woman. The body's womb is inside the body, like other internal organs. But the soul's womb is turned to the outside like the male genitalia, which are external. This is the way the world has brought everything about now. Everything is about capitalism. By the way, the word capital comes from the same word we get the word cap. You wear a cap on your head. When you wear a cap on your head, you're covering the crown chakra. Capitalize, capital, really means to be led by the will, and that's it. No concern for the feminine, and therefore why would we be surprised? The most feminine expression of all, Gaia, Mother Earth, is being destroyed before our very eyes. Therefore, when the womb of the soul, by the Father's will, turns itself inward, and she's baptized, and immediately cleansed of external pollution forced upon her, just as dirty clothing is soaked in water and stirred until the dirt is removed and it is clean. So the cleansing of the soul is to recover the freshness of her former nature and to become as she was. You see, the soul has died because we have attached to who we are as being only our physical reality. It's all about getting rich, getting a big mansion, a nice car, lots of women or lots of men, whatever your persuasion is, because we think it's all about sensation. There's no inner world. The soul has died. Therefore, the receptacle, the womb, has gone barren. And when it's barren, even if the father wanted to implant the seed, it wouldn't germinate. It wouldn't take hold. It would become as an aborted fetus. This is what's happened from the beginning when we had the demiurge, the aborted fetus. That is her baptism. That's what baptism is. Returning back through the soul to the pleroma. But the only way to the pleroma is to go into the soul. You see, through the soul, through Baphomet, through the baptism. Then she will begin to rage at herself like a woman in labor, wreathing and screaming in the hour of delivery. This is when we go from weeping through the stages of grief. We lose our old self. Our old self has died, renewing of the mind, the moon, the feminine. And we begin to have a death of sorts. Because also at the same time, that sadness turns into anger. We also become inflamed and impassioned. And then we take on a pregnancy and we give birth. And during that birthing process, it's painful, right? And like a woman in labor, wreathing and screaming in the hour of delivery, because we become angry of everything we've been told in our past by our pastors, preachers, mother, father. We go on a rampage, much in the way that Gandalf does. And he takes his staff back and he says, "You shall not pass." He becomes inflamed and angry because he sees his whole world is falling apart. And he knows the inner demons is what has caused it. And now, no longer shall he allow limits be placed on him, but he shall be the one that shall set the limits. Discipline, disciple. And he takes the staff and he says, "You shall not pass." Anger, screaming, pain, and anger at everyone that has told you who you are at your own expense. Whether it be your parents, whoever it is, an ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, friends that were supposed to be your friend that stabbed you in the back, the world telling you who you're supposed to be. And you wake up, you first go through suffering and you mourn, and then you wake up, you start to wake up and you become angry and the fire comes on. But since she is female, she is powerless by herself to inseminate a child. But it's in that moment that all of the energy necessary to feed the child is ready. And that's when the seed gets planted. You cannot go through this dark night of the soul if you're not willing to confront. The only way you're going to be able to confront is if you own your anger. Anger is going to give you the passion to get through this dark night. But it's also going to be the energy needed in order to feed the new child that is developing in the womb and that is going to be birthed, the new you, the born again as a child. So the Father sent her from heaven, her man, her brother, the firstborn. This is the Christ. This is also when the Christ comes and brings you gnosis. You wake up. You're like, wait a minute. Your blind anger, your rage has actually waken you up. And you take on gnosis and you say, I now know where I need to go. And no one is going to get in my way. In fact, I'm the one that will set the limits because I'm the one that owns this staff. The bridegroom came down to the bride. She gave up her former whoring and cleansed herself of the pollution of idolaters, and she was renewed to be a bride. She cleansed herself in the bridal chamber. She filled it with perfume and sat there waiting for the true groom. This is telling you about patience and surrendering to the true Father. The Father will bring you everything you need and bring you the seed of what you're intended to be. And follow after the Spirit and everything else will follow. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it will open. Ask and it will be given to you. But it takes you understanding that already within you is the accomplishment. And you need not look on the outside for reputation and all the things everyone else giving you. Only look within. She no longer goes about the marketplace, copulating with whomever she desires, but she waits for him, saying, when will you come? She knows he's coming, but she says, when will you come? And she feared him, not knowing what he looked like. So in other words, the main thing that we are doing when we're going after everything else on the outside is because we are afraid of ourselves. Because we are afraid to look at what our true image is. This is what it's saying here when it says, and she feared him, not knowing what he looked like. Because we are all afraid that we're not going to be accepted, who we are exactly. But who you are exactly is godly. It is the very essence of God. And for you to deny that is to stand in the way of that and to be bondage to the Baphomet, the devil, Satan. And it's also to become as the Antichrist. She no longer remembers, since she fell from her father's house long ago. You see, as a child we remember, but that was long ago. She dreamed of him, but the father's will, like a woman in love with a man. You see, that's what it's like. We must marry ourselves. The outer self, the male, the man, the masculine, must marry and make equal to and create a bond with in the house of the Lord, which is husband, house bond, the Father. They must marry each other, merge as to become one, as was intended in Genesis chapter 1, when it was him was created, male and female, equal, before they were split up in Genesis chapter 2. All right, with that, we're going to leave it there, and we're going to pick up in our next video talking about this thing called the marriage. What is this marriage like? So with that, we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.